And the next thing, a couple minutes go by, and the next thing I know, the door swings open in the back, and he kind of jumps out, and I see him swing his fist. And I'm like, this is not good. The car speeds off. He comes running up to me with blood coming down his face, and he's freaking out, and he's like, they fucking stabbed me. They fucking sliced me.
Hello, welcome to Recovery Demystified, a show where we explore our relationship to substances from a radical, non-religious, and empowering lens. Our sobriety is not a purity contract. It is an invitation to become curious about ourselves and find our own unique paths to growth and healing. If you've been questioning the role of alcohol or drugs in your life and haven't found the resources that you need, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome back to Recovery Demystified. My name's Early. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. I'm proud of everyone for surviving another week. Y'all are doing a great job. Today, I have a first for Recovery Demystified. I interviewed my friend Pepe, and he says that he's never had an addiction. So if you're thinking, what the hell are we doing here on an addiction recovery podcast, talking to someone who says they've never had an addiction, we are getting into one of those other gray areas that I'm really interested in. He does have a history of some substance use in his younger years. And then the gray area that we talk about is something that is like potentially a process addiction. And the most common process addiction that most people know about is gambling. And a process addiction is when we're addicted to an action instead of a substance. And in Pepe's story, we talk about his escalating weed sales that got to the point where he had bought an airplane to fly weed across the country. And he talks about how things like it just sort of got away from him. Like things just grew without him noticing or really thinking about it. And it started as a way to support his family. And then it just became this like big thing. And there are a lot of characteristics of addictive behavior and experience with what he describes. And the interesting part about a lot of our human experience and a lot of the experience of people with trauma is that our perception is like an iceberg where there's this tiny thing that's above the surface that we have an awareness of. And then there's just this like enormous thing under the ocean that we don't have access to. And in his story, he talks a couple of times about having like different experiences in childhood and different experiences also in adulthood where like reflecting on it, there's like a different perspective than the experience of what he went through at the time. And although when we're talking about it, we're like, is this an addiction? Is this not an addiction? I think it's something that like perhaps in a growth state in the future, once he's able to like look down at the iceberg below the surface at like some of the inner workings of like what was going on for him might come up. And that's like the really cool thing about healing and inner work is that we get to discover all of this stuff about ourselves and grow and change. And one topic that we do get into a little bit in this episode is some childhood sexual abuse. It's not details or anything, but if that is something that you don't want to hear about today, then maybe this one is not for you. And as always, if you get anything out of this podcast, we are listener supported. So if you're able to, we have the link for the Patreon down in the description. And there's also a donation button on our website. And there's a really cool merch store where you can get Toad shirts and Crackhead White Jesus is Coming t-shirts. And if you can't afford to support us monetarily, it's super helpful if you hit the 5-star button or hit the subscribe button. And if you have a minute to leave us a review, all of that stuff helps other listeners who need to hear this message find the podcast. And of course, if this episode helps you, share it with a friend. And without further ado, here is my interview with Pepe. Hello, Pepe. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here and share my story with your listeners.
Cool. Yeah. Will you start by introducing yourself to the audience? Let them know your pronouns and just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my government name is Scott, but for years now I've been known as Pepe. And I go by he, him. And a little bit about me, at least currently, I have an active role in the folk punk music community. I'm not a music performer, but I have run a record label for 20 years almost, like 2 different ones. And I am also a coffee roaster right now, which I'm sure we'll get into why I became a coffee roaster at some point during the interview.
Very cool. All right. Yeah, we're here to talk today about your story with addiction and recovery. And I guess I'm interested what it was like for you to be a little kid, maybe some of your first encounters with substances, and then when things got bad for you, and ultimately where you're at today. So yeah, to start wherever you'd like.
Sure. I mean, as a kid, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Definitely a different time period than current. No internet. I had the opportunity to perhaps run a little more free than most kids do nowadays, it seems. I mean, it wasn't too outrageous for me to go on my bike and go miles away from home and on my own and just come back when the streetlights turn on so you can have dinner. And parents wouldn't know where you were all day. And that wasn't particularly a problem at the time. That was a pretty common thing back then. So I was definitely interested in spending a lot of time on my own, traveling around, or like knocking on friends' doors. So I was very comfortable being by myself even at a young age. And my childhood, basically, like, it seems kind of funny to say it, but like it seems like I would say it was fine. But there was a lot that happened that wasn't. And I guess maybe now it's because I've dealt with those things, but I'd say around 4th grade, 5th grade, I began to experience sexual abuse. Not from an immediate family member, but someone like within the extended family. And that happened for some time until I told one of my parents, and thankfully they believed me and that came to an end. But that has definitely played a role in my life for many years. Sometimes I was not aware of how much of a role it played, and sometimes I thought I had moved beyond it and something would happen to make me realize I hadn't. And I guess moving forward to like teenage years, where it's a very difficult time for most teenagers, you're trying to figure out who you are. The old parts of you are kind of dying off, like the people you used to hang out with. You might not be as interested in hanging out with them. You used to like to maybe go out and do things with your parents. You're no longer interested in doing that. You kind of want to be on your own and separating from them. It's kind of like your job as a teenager is to spend as much time as possible away from your parents. And I had great parents, but, I was just struggling as a teenager, like many do, just feeling awkward and out of place or trying to find my place.
I'm curious, was there any addiction in your family? And when you describe like spending whole days riding your bike away from your family, and that being normal, like looking back, were you kind of like a latchkey kid, or was that actually just like normal, wholesome activities for you in childhood?
I was definitely like a latchkey kid. I had the rope with the key around my neck. I'd come home. My parents divorced when I was young, so my mom was working a lot. She was a single mother taking care of me and my brother. And so I definitely would come home on my own, starting from a pretty young age. And, I became self-sufficient and just making food for myself, like much younger than most people do. So it was normal in a latchkey sense, for sure, yeah.
Do you remember what it felt like as a kid? Do you remember, like, if you yearned for any attention from your parents that you weren't getting, or did it all just completely feel normal?
It completely felt normal. Like I said, I yearned to go off and go on my own adventures, and whether that was with friends from the neighborhood or by myself. It never particularly felt like something was lacking from my parents. I mean, my parents divorced when I was young, so I don't ever remember living with my father, but I saw him like on the weekends. He always, paid child support to my mom. Like he was always a prominent part of my life. And my mom, she was working a lot to support us, so she wasn't around a ton, but she was always supportive and encouraging. Sometimes a little too encouraging. As I got older, it just felt a little corny, but I understood it was because, she loved me.
And when was the first time in your life that you saw like adults using substances?
I mean, I definitely saw people like drinking casually, on holiday gatherings and things like that. It never particularly stuck out to me. honestly, like my first time of like noticing substances were prominent was not from adults around me. It was just from my teenage years and kind of meeting random people on the street. I mean, I can get into that a little bit where I was in high school my freshman year. And like I said, as a teenager, like many, it's hard to kind of find your place. And I felt kind of outcasted in a sense. Like I definitely found somewhat of my place amongst like the skaters and the punks at the time. But even within them, I was like more like into more subculture even than they were. So like I hung out with those people. They all liked me, but it still felt like I was looking for something more. And school was not the place for me, high school. And one day I was probably about 15 and I just decided like I can't do this. And I walked out of school.
What about it was hard for you?
Well, it just made no sense like to me. Like, what am I doing this for? Like I was getting very little value from school itself. And now part of that was my teenager rebellion. Like, you could learn things in there, obviously you do, but they were not things that seemed relevant or important or valuable to the life I wanted at the time. And I'm not saying 100% the life I wanted at the time was ideal either, but it's just, I thought I could be doing much better things with my time as a 15-year-old than sitting here listening to things I don't even care about.
What was the life you wanted at the time?
Well, I wanted to kind of continue what I had as a child and like go on this adventure and this life of freedom where I wasn't restricted, by whether it was by teachers, parents. Like I said, my parents were not that restricted, but I just didn't want rules or restrictions placed on me. I wanted to go out into the world and do my thing as I wished.
And I know we talked a little bit on your podcast about how the both of us experienced sexual abuse as a child and the effect that had later on in life. I just want to say I'm really sorry that you went through that, and that it's so amazing that your parents were supportive of you and believed you and helped put an end to it. Looking back, do you trace any of that trauma to this like young adult desire to run away and have freedom? Because like it's totally normal to have teenage rebellion. It's a little bit less normal to want to completely drop out and run away from school at the age of 15. So I'm just curious if like in reflection, you think there's any connection there?
I mean, on a surface level, it doesn't feel like it to me. I'm sure there has to be some type of connection, perhaps deeper down. And later in my story, I'll be sure to bring it up if we don't get there. Like, there's definitely things that happened in my life that sometimes it took me 30 plus years to realize they were connected to the sexual abuse I experienced as a kid. But at that time, I wasn't processing that. Like, even the process of me telling my parents, I remember like in 5th grade is when I told my mom, and I was on the school bus one day and I had this little like Swiss Army knife, little tiny one. And, I was just a young kid and I was trying to impress some kid next to me. So I opened the Swiss Army knife and I put like a gash in the bus seat. And the kid ended up telling, I guess, the bus driver. The next day, the principal of the school called my mom to tell my mom what happened. And my mom came to me and said, was there anything wrong? Is there something bothering me? And as a young kid, I wasn't even thinking of this when I cut the bus seat. But when my mom asked me that question, I just blurted out like, I'm not going to say their name, but like this person was touching me and and I said that. And that was how I told my mom, because I slashed a bus seat. So maybe these things were things I was doing, looking unconsciously for a way to like share that. But it didn't feel like, I didn't think about the abuse when I was a kid that much. Like after it stopped happening, it wasn't like something I was thinking about. It was not regularly like in my mind.
Kudos to your mother, honestly, for like thinking even to ask you if something's wrong, because I feel like a lot of parents would just go straight towards punishment. So like very, very impressed and grateful for your mother that she asked you that, because wow, what a door to open.
Yeah, I wonder if I ever would have said anything, honestly. Like, now that you bring that up, I don't know if I ever would have shared what happened, and who knows, if I would have not shared it. I mean, I've done a lot of work with other men who've dealt with sexual abuse, and maybe that never would have happened either if I never had that opportunity. So yeah, it's I am thankful my mom believed me and asked.
So did you end up dropping out of high school?
Yeah, I mean, I just stopped going. So I didn't like sign paperwork or anything like that. I just didn't go to school. Originally, like I started like I would just skip homeroom and kind of hide in the auditorium, and then I would go to whatever classes I liked. And back then, like the school, they don't call home. I mean, I was absent for 80 days. They never called home. And eventually I just started walking around town. Like I said, I wasn't learning the things I wanted in high school. So one of the places I went to was the local library. Like I would skip school and go to the library and like just start reading and learning about things that interest me at the time. And I would also just, I would like lie to my mom, which it's so bizarre to me because I had like a very good upbringing with both my parents. But I'd be like, oh, I'm sleeping over at my friend's house. And it was a total lie. And like, I would go sleep like in the 24-hour laundromat. And like it was just stuff like that. And that led me to where you asked earlier about substances and seeing them. And I remember seeing some older kids like walking around town, these like older metalheads. And I was pretty young. I was like 15. And they had noticed I'd been around for a couple days. Like, so they invited me to go to their place and like stay with them. And, they were smoking weed. They let me smoke weed with them. But that wasn't the first drug I did. I mean, when I was attending high school, I did LSD quite a few times, like even when I was going to school. But yeah, it was mostly teenagers who introduced me, or the first time I saw that stuff.
And the first time you saw it, did you like know what it was? And you're like, oh, I definitely want to try that. Like, what was your thought process when there was acid and weed around when you were a teenager?
Yeah, well, acid was the first drug I did. Because there was kind of like, I don't know if this was everywhere at the time period, like in the early to mid 90s in the US or just in my area, but there was like definitely like a big like hippie kind of thing happening. Now that wasn't like the area that I was more into the punk thing, but because there was a big hippie thing happening, at least in my area, acid was fairly common to find. And there was like, when I'm a freshman, there was like seniors who, lived around me who just were getting fucked up at their house all the time in that hippie mentality. So there was acid there quite a bit. I mean, heroin eventually stepped in. I wasn't around as much when that happened. But yeah, so, I knew about acid. I knew what it was. I remember the first time I took it, I had gone to a ska show with one of my close friends. His older brother took us. And, we were both in freshman in high school, and his older brother took us, and I had acid that I got from this hippie kid, and I just took it by myself. Like, my friend was there, and I was staying at his house that night, and we left the show, and I was, like, obviously, like, fucked up on acid. It was my first time doing it, and I remember, like, my friend might have told his sister, his older sister, because she was familiar with that stuff. So they were kind of keeping an eye on me from a distance, and I remember hearing them talk, being like, oh, he's kind of playing into it a little bit, and I was definitely, like, playing it up. But my friend fell asleep, and obviously people who've done acid, like, you don't fall asleep on that. So I was, like, up all night, like, sitting on the stairs. And I don't know, I did enjoy that feeling, and I went back to doing acid for a while before I ever even smoked weed.
Did you enjoy those first times using acid?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, it created this nice bodily feeling. I didn't really see anything the first couple of times. But it was almost like I said, that adventure that I wanted. It seemed like I was experiencing something different and new and exciting. So it was like almost an extension of that adventure. And, I would, like I said, sometimes I'd go to school and just go to the classes I wanted to, and I'd be like high on acid in school. And that went on for quite some time. I ended up smoking weed here and there for whatever reason. Maybe it was like the hippie thing. It was just easier for me to get acid as a teenager. And some time went by, and I was probably 16, about a year later. And my mom was seeing someone at the time who had kids as well. They were a little bit older than me. So they were these two girls that I lived with my mom and who she was seeing. And one of the girls wanted to do acid. She never did. And I said I would do it with her. She was going to get together with a group of her friends. and we were all going to get this hotel room and go do acid. So it was like her and 4 or 5 of her friends that I never met, and then me. And she ended up having to cancel for whatever reason. So I go to this hotel room with a group of people I never met in my life, and they were all close together, connected, already friends and bonding. And we're all doing acid, and I'm feeling isolated and alone because I'm just not on that level with them. And it was bizarre to me because I've done like 7 hits of acid and been fine. I did 1 tab and I had a bad trip, like bad enough trip to the point that like I thought about killing myself. Like I freaked out. I started screaming, having a bad trip. I ran out the hotel room. Like there was like a water tower. I was considering climbing up this water tower and jumping off, because it's not so much that like for me at least, it wasn't so much that you're so scared of like what you're seeing. Like what I saw, basically, like the hotel walls, they were like stained wood, where it has those like black splotches, and those started like pushing out and then eventually turning into giant claws, and these claws were coming in from all over, like all the walls around me. But what scared me so much was I thought that's how I would have to live the rest of my life, because your sense of time is like lost when you're on acid. And I just thought I couldn't live the rest of my life like that. And thankfully somebody there kind of like grabbed me and talked me down and, and helped me move through that. But after that, I remember going to smoke weed in the woods with some kids, and I just freaked out when I was smoking weed. I didn't see anything, but it brought back the same bodily feeling and mental feeling in my head. And I remember just like covering my eyes, like thinking I'm going to start to see these things again. And I was just like, I'm having a bad trip. I said, I'm having a flashback. And so after that, I couldn't smoke weed anymore because it just brought on this horrible feeling that I had when I had the bad trip.
And you were still a teenager then?
Yeah, this was definitely 16, because I had a kid by the time I'm 17. This was before I had kids.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I hear that same story a lot, and the exact same thing or a very similar thing happened to me when I was 18, where I had a really bad trip on mushrooms. And then after that, I couldn't smoke weed anymore either because it gave me the same intense sense of anxiety. I just really wonder what is going on like neurobiologically to people when that kind of thing happens, because it's scary and it's weird. And then something that used to be fun or give you relief all of a sudden is like horrifying. So, damn.
Well, what's interesting? I noticed after that, for this brief period of time, I'm glad I had a kid so young, because that's really what prompted me to stop most drugs. But I was like, I can't get high on acid and I can't smoke weed. So what can I do? And I started messing around with pills. And the pills were the only thing that didn't seem to bring on that like anxiety and flashback, that type thing that was happening.
Were you experimenting with pills? Did it feel like just normal teenage experimentation, or were you trying to get rid of a feeling at that point?
Again, I wasn't conscious of if I was trying to get rid of something. I mean, I think that's largely what goes on probably for a lot of people who turn to substances, whether they're conscious of it or not. But I just felt like experimenting. I felt like being high was fun, and I lost these other opportunities with weed and LSD. So now I got to find something else. And like morphine was around, so like I'd get that every now and then, and just whatever I can get. I'm glad that, like I said, by the time I was 17, a year later, I had a kid, and that encouraged me to quit doing drugs, because I know, the path I was on with morphine, I mean, I saw it play out with a lot of people around me, like it led to heroin.
Yeah, so you had a kid. What's the story with that?
Well, I had a kid when I was 17. It's pretty wild to be 17 and have a kid. My girlfriend, who I met in high school, she was a year older. She was 18. And, my initial response to finding out we were going to have a kid was excitement. Like our relationship was struggling a little bit at the time. And I thought this would be great because this is just going to bring us together, which it does. When you have kids, it brings you together, but it doesn't mean it makes it easier. So we had to focus on becoming parents. She graduated high school, I think right before she gave birth. And I understood the best thing to do was like kind of get my shit together the best I could, which meant stepping away from substances, which I was able to do, and just get a job. So I got some crappy job and began working all the time. And the friends I had pretty much all disappeared because no, especially like the guys, like no 17, 18-year-old guy wants to hang out with a baby. It's like, let's go hang out with Pepe and his baby. Like one of my friends, I do give him credit. He came around and hung out at the house and, stayed there. But it was very isolating in one way, but then it pushed me into a new territory where I'm working 40, 50 hours a week, meeting generally older people in the restaurant industry, which was also very drug infused. Not for me, but for them.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from parents, that it becomes really isolating because people don't want to hang out with you when you have a kid. So I think that that's pretty common and like really unfortunate, because things like that shouldn't be a fracture in our community. It should be something that brings us together to be able to help each other, take care of each other. And it's interesting to me that you're able to just completely walk away from substances at that point and just turn towards self-care and care for your family. What happened in your life as you got older?
Well, it didn't take long before we had another kid. So by the time I was about to turn 21, my girlfriend and I, 2 days before my 21st birthday, we had our third kid. So we were busy. I was working nonstop to raise my family. That was just basically my life. I mean, it was depressing in the sense that in the capitalist economy, it's so hard to survive. So obviously this is not like the fault of my children or, the fault of their mother or anything like that. But like, I was depressed from working 50 plus hours a week at that age. It was just hard, to be a teenager who craved freedom. I mean, we don't have to get into this a ton, but like some of my teenage years, like I was hopping on freight trains. I was just waking up and deciding I want to go to this state, and I would go. So there was a lot of freedom that I had to sacrifice. And I didn't mind sacrificing it for my children, but it felt more like I was sacrificing it towards like the wage economy. And that just didn't sit right with me. And it was like a very difficult period for me for years to kind of overcome that sense of depression from that.
That makes sense to me, especially because you're probably spending way more hours at work thinking about how depressing work was, and you're doing it to support your children, but then those are all hours that you're not spending with your family. So it makes a ton of sense for that to feel depressing. Where did things progress in your life from there?
So we ended up having one more kid. It was 7 years later, 2008. And I had been working in the restaurant industry. I kind of worked my way up to culinary manager. In the year 2008, for those who are old enough to remember, and if you're not, it was the housing crash in America. And because the housing market crashed, people did not have a lot of money. The economy was doing bad. And as a result, they were not going out to eat into restaurants as much. So a lot of restaurants ended up closing. The restaurant I worked at, they said, we're going to cut your pay. They cut my pay $1.50 an hour. They said, but if you stick around in a year, we're probably going to give it back. So I stuck around trying to raise my 4 kids with $1.50 less an hour. A year goes by and they say, actually, we're cutting it another $1.50 an hour. And I just lost, it's essentially like a paycheck a month, the way it averaged out. And I could not afford to take care of my family. So that year, 2008, I decided to make a little extra money selling some marijuana on the side. And I remember like in the restaurant industry, like people partied a lot. I did not. Like I said, at this point, I gave up all drugs. I was focused on my family. People thought it was a joke when they heard like, wait, Pepe's selling weed? But it was a good place to sell weed because people in there smoke a lot of weed and do a lot of drugs. So I had access to, all these people who would be interested in buying the weed. And I just had someone like getting me a small amount of weed. They would essentially bag it up, give it to me bagged up. I'd go out and sell it, and then they give me a small amount of money back. And it was a nice little extra buffer. But I was like, why am I even going through this person? Like I don't need them. I'm selling for them so they could smoke for free. I'm like, I might as well just get my own and sell it. And I decided to do that. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. But because I think, one, I didn't use drugs or smoke weed. So when people called me for their weed, I was prompt. I was on time. I wasn't that like stoner, like, yeah, I'll meet you at 4 and it's like 6:30 and you're calling your dealer. I was there. So I was successful with people. Like people wanted to come get their weed from me. And also I didn't smoke it. So the money I was making, I would take care of my family, and whatever was left, I'd just reinvest into the weed business. And now jumping ahead, it took off. It went extremely well. By 2012, I was making pretty decent money. And then some years after that, I don't remember what year, it got to the point like I was getting it in the mail, like hundreds of pounds, and it just wasn't enough. But I had saved up enough money to buy an airplane and hire a pilot. Some things happened in between with this, and I just had weed being flown across the country. I had brought 2 people on as partners with me to help me do this.
Let's rewind to this, because that took about a minute to really just go from 0 to 100. I'm curious, when you first started, selling dime bags or whatever, and kind of just being a middleman, what emotionally was that like for you? Were you like scared of getting caught, or were you like excited because it was like a dangerous activity? Like where were you at mentally when you first started selling?
No, I wasn't scared of getting caught. Like I said, I was in a restaurant. Everyone there partied. Even the managers, like they all knew I sold. Everyone partied, like except for me. So the environment I was in, I wasn't concerned about that. Like that was my main base. So it felt good to finally, at the early stages, like have enough money to not have to worry about getting evicted because I didn't have enough money to pay the rent. When I started making a little more money and doing it on my own, I don't remember exactly at what level, but at a certain level, it actually got uncomfortable for me because I was so used to being broke and poor and like, I guess there's a whole nother area of people in the restaurant industry, a lot of immigrants who generally didn't party, but they were like working as much, if not more than me. And I really connected to that community. That's where my nickname Pepe comes from. Some people from Guatemala ended up calling me that, and it just stuck because they said it meant like, if you didn't know somebody and you saw them on the street, but they were like friendly with you, you would say Pepe like, as like, hey, comrade. So that's where the name comes from. And I was so connected to this idea that like I was a member, particularly of the poor working class, that when I started making decent money, it felt uncomfortable. Like that was like when I had an excess of money, I felt like I was doing something wrong. So that was something that I struggled with at a certain point for sure.
Why did you keep expanding if you were already uncomfortable with the amount of money that you were making?
I mean, maybe at this time I wasn't as conscious of this, and this is where like maybe it could start to almost be an addiction. But like, I mean, I'm just gonna like speak of this in the terms that I'm familiar with. But like the game, like people might think this is just weed, but we're talking, at this time it was illegal. At this time it was like $5,000 for 1 pound of weed. So it was a very different time period. And the game, it kind of almost takes on a mind of its own, right? And it's like, it starts like dragging you with it. And it's happening and it's in motion and I'm just like going with that motion. It was more like it was leading me than I was like leading it in a sense. And eventually I did get comfortable with making the money. I mean, I remember the first time I was cleaning my room and I found a pair of pants that must have been under my bed for 2 weeks, maybe 2 months. I don't know. I'm going to wash them and there's $1,000 in the pocket. And it's like, I had just misplaced $1,000 and I didn't even know.
Yeah, that's being on a whole nother level for sure. Before, when we were talking, you had mentioned that perhaps the risk was something that was motivating you, like the excitement of the risk. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and we're still talking like at these smaller levels for me. This is like before I got the plane. But I remember like I didn't even have a car. Like all this time I had no car. I used to take the bus to work. I was like, on the bus bringing weed to work or going to meet people. I mean, I remember the first time that risk scared me. I remember waiting at the bus stop. I had like almost a full pound of weed in my backpack and you could smell it. And I walked into Dunkin' Donuts while I'm waiting for the bus stop to grab a coffee, and there's a cop in line. And like I walk right behind him, and I'm like, fuck. And like if I just walk out, like that's kind of sketchy. But if I stay here, he might smell this weed. And you know, it was probably like $4K worth of weed. And he, I guess, didn't notice. And just standing next to him that whole time with this illegal thing, like that risk was exciting to me. I mean, I come from the punk and radical community, so I definitely had like this distrust of authority. So there was this element of like kind of sticking it to the man, for sure. You know, I'm doing these illegal things and you don't even know.
Did your family know about it?
No, they didn't know until my second arrest.
So they thought that you're making all this money at the restaurant?
I mean, they thought, you know, it wasn't like, so I'm making all this money, but I never moved out of my apartment. You know, like we stayed in our small apartment. I didn't even get a car. Like, it's so weird that I didn't get a car when I was able to afford one easily until much later. So like I wasn't interested in like monetary things like for myself. You know, I didn't do that. And eventually I started a record label when I had some excess money. So I was able to say like the record label was making me money when it wasn't. I was just putting the money towards helping out like underground hip hop and punk musicians put their music out, even if it was at a loss to me. I did work with some people who became rather recognized like around the country, but generally I didn't make money off that. I was just giving it to them and helping them. But that was my excuse for how I was surviving.
So after you started making more money than you needed to survive and you were getting sort of like the high type of feeling from, you know, being anti-authority and rebellious and being able to, you know, sort of build up this underground way to make money for yourself, how did things progress for you from there? You said you kind of felt like you were swept away with it.
Yeah, so it continued to grow, like I said. And to me, it was like, at the time, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Like, and I guess it, you know, it was bigger than I realized. I think that happens a lot though with people in a situation like mine. Like, you don't like to admit that you might be as much of a target as you actually are, whether that's from the police or from like, you know, thugs that want to rob you. I mean, I can get into some of that if you want to hear, you know, some of those stories. Would you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, some of the things, and this is where it's like, I said, it's like, maybe it was an addiction. I don't know. I never thought of it that way. But I remember one time, you know, I'm still living, my kid's mom and I ended up breaking up. But while we were together, you know, I was selling weed and people would come to my house and I would just meet them outside. And I remember one time I had this person I'd been selling weed to for a while, quarter pound, half pound, whatever. And he wanted to get it from me and then sell it to somebody else. And he was going to have them meet me. These new people come to my house. And I said, listen, I don't want to deal with them. I don't know them. So I'll give you the weed. You can run out to their car and just come back and give me the money. And I'm standing at the top of my driveway and I'm kind of looking down. It's like a hill where the other people are parked. He gets in the car. And the next thing, a couple minutes go by, and the next thing I know, the door swings open in the back, and he kind of jumps out, and I see him swing his fist. And I'm like, this is not good. The car speeds off. He comes running up to me with blood coming down his face, and he's freaking out, and he's like, they fucking stabbed me. They fucking sliced me. And he's like, I need a mirror. I need a mirror. And meanwhile, like, I'm like, dude, I can't bring you into my house. So I'm like, listen, I open my basement. I'm like, go in the basement. Stay very quiet. And just go down here and I'll come back with a mirror. And like, I didn't have like a small mirror. I had to like, my kid's mom had this like full size mirror and I'm trying to like sneak it down into the basement. Like, so her and the kids don't see. And this guy is like bleeding with his face slashed open. And I'm in the basement, like trying to talk to him about what happened. He's, you know, wanting to get some type of revenge and asking me if I can help him do that, which at the time, like I was like, yeah, I probably could because I knew people who were in an initiation gang, you know, who part of their job was to do collections. Like I never utilized them, but they bought weed from me. And I was like, maybe I can talk to them and they can handle this. But yeah, it was just like, I look back at it now and that's just one example that like, I was doing that like around my family. And like now, like it blows my mind. I would never do something like that. And things like that they increased where it started happening to me. Like another time, I was meeting some people in my garage who I worked with for a while, and two brothers, and they pulled up. I saw them in the car, like I always do. They come in the garage, and we're in the garage doing our deal, and I'm not thinking anything of it because I've dealt with them for years. And then all of a sudden, someone comes running in who must have been laying down in the back seat. He's wearing a ski mask, and he has a gun, and he puts the gun to my head and puts me on my knees. And my kid's house is like 300 feet away, not 150 feet away. And he ties my hands behind my back with zip ties. And the last time they were there, they saw a lot of weed. Like they saw a lot more than they usually buy. And I think that they thought I still had it, and I didn't. But I just remember they had the gun to my head, and I was like, dude, take what you want. Like, I have no beef with you. Like, take what you want. And it wasn't much. They asked me like if I had more, and I was like, it's in the house. Like, there's very little. It's like an ounce in the house. And they ended up just leaving. And then I remember like I had to walk back in my house like nothing happened. Like, I had to pretend nothing happened. I mean, I didn't have to, but that was my response. My response wasn't, well, and then my second action was to call the kid who introduced me to those people and say, hey, give me their contact because I need to handle this. Like, I need to find out who they are, where they're from, because I need to take care of it. My response was not, maybe I should quit doing this because now it's like threatening potentially my family and my kids. Like, that didn't even go through my mind at the time.
What do you make of that now? Because I know you said, oh, maybe it was an addiction. Like, was there some sort of like emotional roller coaster, some like level of just secrecy and excitement about the risk that was like keeping you doing that? How do you reflect on it?
A big part of it was, so I mean, the illegal marijuana money was helping me take care of my family for sure. The job wasn't doing it. I mean, at a certain point, I quit my job. So when you put yourself in that position, you quit a legit job, even though it wasn't making enough money for you. Now you're dependent on an illegal job. I'm making way more than I need, but I couldn't just simply walk away from it because then I would not be making any money to take care of my family. So you're kind of like thinking like, well, you can't stop. This is all you know. And there's also like this sense of importance because my operation at this time was pretty big, no airplane yet, but like there was a large number of people, like other dealers. I was just selling to dealers at this point, not to like smokers per se. And they depended on me. And it was like, I had this sense of importance. Like these people needed me to make their money so they could do whatever it is they're doing. And it didn't feel like an addiction. It just felt like it was important. And I lost sense of what was actually more important during this time. Which, to me, I guess, maybe you know better than me, sounds like an addiction.
I mean, it all just kind of depends on what's going on inside of your head, you know what I mean? And there's like, I don't know, there's this human need to categorize everything, and maybe not everything is necessarily entirely categorizable. Like, there is such a thing as a process addiction, which like gambling is probably the most recognized form of a process addiction, where the person isn't addicted to a substance, but they're addicted to like the risk and reward of the entire thing. So I guess it sort of is in this like weird gray area, but I mean, it would just be up to you to define for yourself, really. But I mean, it's certainly like a maladaptive and risky activity, especially when it seems to be like out of control. I mean, it sounds like in the beginning it was to take care of your family, and then it turned into something that became way, way, way more complex than that. Yeah. Do you remember it being any sort of other like emotional roller coaster type of thing? Or was it just a lot of the, well, I guess I'm stuck in this now and I kind of feel important and I like that too?
I mean, I wasn't even thinking I was stuck in it. That wasn't a conscious thought. It was just like, I got to keep this thing going. Like I created this thing and I got to keep it going. And that's important. It wasn't even like I'm stuck. I didn't feel stuck. I felt like it felt like it was just work. I mean, that's what I considered it, my job. And if you want, I can kind of jump to a couple of key moments.
Yeah, let's get to it.
Okay. So as this began to grow, I was hiring people to receive packages of marijuana in the mail. So generally I would send like 6 pounds. I have them sent in the mail to someone else's address with a fake name. And I probably had like 10 addresses, like just getting 6 pounds every week. And one day, one of the packages never showed up at this address. So me, being foolish, decide, okay, well, I'm going to track the package on my computer so I can find out where it is. And it kind of like making its way across the country and it just disappears. So then I decide I'm going to call the post office and find out where it is. And they're just kind of giving me the runaround saying they don't know where it is. So then I end up considering it a loss. And obviously, I'm not going to use that address again. And then a few days after that, the package is getting delivered to the person's house. Now, the person I was paying to do this, they had a roommate who was unaware of what was going on. So their roommate is home, and there's a knock on the door. And they open the door, and it's what looks like a mailman. And they're holding this big box with 6 pounds of weed in it. And this roommate had no idea what was going on. And they say, well, the name on there is fake. So they say, that person doesn't live here. That's not for us. And this mailman, quote unquote, really wanted them to take the package and they wouldn't. And unless like the package went in the house, from my understanding, like they couldn't do anything. So they essentially pushed the package into the guy's hands and he was forced to take it in the house, at which point the mailman declared he was a cop and all these other cops come running in and they just like raid the house. So the person that lived there that I was working with, he didn't say nothing. He didn't give up my name. But because I had tracked the package, like half a year went by. Nothing happened. And like they traced me tracking the package back to where I live. So I thought this was over and done with. And the internet was now, and I had broken up with my ex, and I am now with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. The internet was in her name. So they get a warrant, and they end up raiding our house. Neither of us were home at the time. She gets a call from the neighbors saying, like, the state police are raiding your house. They broke down the door. And she ends up getting arrested. And I was unaware of this at the time. I was actually on a music tour with a couple of friends of mine, and folks might know some of them. One was called Pat the Bunny, another was Latchkey. They're both kind of prominent people in the folk punk and underground rap world for sure. And she had gotten arrested and given me a call, and I had this bad practice at the time of not answering numbers I didn't know. So she's calling me from the police station. I didn't answer. So she spent the night in a holding cell. It's a whole story, which was pretty wild. And the next morning, I hear the voicemail, and I, give her a call back. She had gotten out. She had a family member from out of state bail her out. So she told me that the state police had this giant folder with my name on it, like this big file. And she's like, they're looking for you. And I had come back to Connecticut, where I'm from. But she's like, they're looking for you. So my response then was, all right, I got to go back out on this tour and like get away. I can't get arrested, which again, another thing I wouldn't have just, like, she had just been arrested. She was like freaking out and I left. Like, I was like, see ya. I mean, I wasn't like, screw you. Like, I stayed there, I comforted her for the day, but like, and then I left. And I was like, I can't get arrested right now. Let me figure out a plan so I can handle it when I do get arrested. So I came back, and I don't know, a week or so later, they found me and arrested me. And this was by the state police. So my response to this was not, I'm going to quit. My response was, well, if you're going to fuck with me getting weed in the mail, I'm going to have to figure something else out so I can continue doing what I'm doing. And I decided to take my 2 best customers at the time. And I said to them, listen, the police are fucking with me right now. I said, I'll make you a deal. If the 2 of you see all my people that I can't see because I just got arrested, I'm being watched. If you go around and see all my people and give me all the money back, I will give you the weed you normally get at cost. So I won't make a profit off of you. So we'll be like basically partners, but for like 1 year, you need to take care of all my clients because I can't do it until these state police are off my back. And so combining the 3 of us, it kind of grew. And as that grew, I was already struggling to get enough. That's when, with them combined, we were able to like need and make enough money to get the airplane.
I mean, it's just curious to me. I guess there's really no way to know without crawling inside of your brain and your experience back then about like, was this a process addiction, or was it just like you're just kind of wrapped up in something and you're a punk, so you hate authority and you're just like, fuck this, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah, I guess there's no way for me to really know that.
I mean, it definitely felt like the later to me, for sure. And when the state police got me, it was kind of like, it was like, you're going to fuck with me? I'm like, no, fuck you. Like, it was definitely like that type of attitude. Like, I'm just going to come back even harder now. Like, that was the attitude, you know, it was definitely like a fuck you authority attitude.
Yeah. Well, what happened after that?
We started thinking of the alternate methods to transport this marijuana, and I came up with the idea, I was like, well, maybe we can get a plane. We just got to like find a pilot. And, you know, we knew someone who had a plane. We weren't anticipating to have them fly the marijuana. We just wanted to talk to them about what something like that might entail, because we didn't know about airplanes, you know. So I went and had a conversation with this person, not directly saying what we were doing, and he kind of got the gist of what was up. And he's like, why don't you just tell me what's going on? And we're like, you know, we said, yeah, it's weed, you know, this amount of weed we want to have flown. And we're like, what would something like that cost? You know, like, what would you have to pay a pilot to do that? We didn't say you know. And he's like, I'm not really sure. And we just kind of said, well, how about $20,000 every flight plus all your expenses paid? And he kind of just looked at his wrist, at his watch, and he like tapped his wrist and he's like, when do you want to go? And that's what started that. So yeah, we had a pilot, and owning an airplane. He already had a plane. It's an East Coast plane. I'm on the East Coast. I don't know a ton about planes, but one thing became very apparent rather quickly. He was flying this plane out all the way over to California, going over like deserts and stuff. And his plane, being an East Coast plane, wasn't built for that type of terrain. I guess the heat from the ground kind of comes up, hits the bottom of the plane, and it just wasn't designed that way. And so it started having all these mechanical problems. And when a plane, it's not like a car, like you have a problem, it's like he'll be like, hey guys, mechanical issue, $17,000. So like, boom, we give him the 17 grand, fix the plane. All right, 2 months go by, mechanical issue, 9,000. What? It's like, here you go. Mechanical issue, 12,000. And we're just like, what is going on with this mechanical issue? He's like, my plane's not built for this. So like, we got to get another plane. So we give him the money to buy a new plane more suited for the type of travel he would have to do. You know, we gutted the whole plane, took all the seats out so we can load it up with marijuana. And, you know, we're going back and forth. Like, he would just fly out on his own. There was no room for us because we literally loaded it up. And towards the end, we ended up getting caught. The last trip, we probably had about $500,000 worth of marijuana that we just bought on the plane. He lands in Connecticut, and I guess they had been following him. And when he landed, the feds were there waiting. And they came to him and said, oh, we want to check the plane. He said, do you have a warrant? They said, no, we don't have a warrant, but we don't need one because we're going to do a ramp check. A ramp check is like pilot lingo. It means technically a ramp check only allows them to look at the outside of the plane and inspect the outside. It doesn't allow them to enter. So he said, oh, okay. You know, at that point, he said it was okay. And he let them in the plane. They found all the weed. And I don't know what they said to him, what happened. Obviously, they scared the hell out of him. And they said that, you know, he staged delivery to me and one of my partners. We were waiting to receive the marijuana elsewhere. Like, we had people who oftentimes, like, we would pay somebody's mortgage to let us use their house to, like, receive the marijuana. So it would just be like a place where it would get dropped off, 500 pounds, it would get split up, and then it's out of there like that same day. But he leads the feds to us. We're unaware that he's coming with the feds. So we're standing there, and the next thing I know, out of his pickup truck and behind him, these people jump out in ski masks, all black with guns. So I'm thinking we're getting robbed. And they throw us on the ground, and some time goes by. I got a gun in my head. Some time goes by before they even announce like that they're feds. They had no badges or anything on their outer person identifying them as that. And yeah, I get put into a holding cell with my one partner. And I remember thinking like, oh, I was like yelling across the holding cell to him. Like he had asked, like, are we going to do time, you think? I'm like, it's just weed. And this was 2017. It was still illegal in Connecticut, in the state. And I guess I was in denial that we were going to end up serving time, but I ended up getting sentenced to about 5 years in federal prison.
What did they charge you with?
So it was just, the charge was, I can't remember the exact, but basically I got charged with moving like over 1 ton of marijuana, which is so crazy. This is called ghost drugs. Have you ever heard that term? Ghost drugs?
No, I haven't. What's that?
So it's like a term in prison a lot. So they found 500 pounds of marijuana. So they didn't find any more than that. That's what was on the plane. But they say you made X amount of trips. So that means you must have had several thousands of pounds. So they charge you with that, even though they never found it. And in prison, we call that ghost drugs. Happens all the time, which is very frustrating for people in prison getting charged for something that was never actually found.
Yeah, how can they do that with no evidence?
Their evidence is like, okay, we have it marked by the FAA that this airplane made these trips, like it's being monitored, moving across the country multiple times. And, technically, I guess you can't prove that marijuana was on each time, but they're saying if this is what you had on this trip and we know you made at least this many, like that's their logic there.
Well, I don't like that logic. What was your time like in
many people
prison?
Getting drug crimes don't like it. Yeah. So yeah, and then the other thing that they did, which is very frustrating, actually has been a problem for my life since I've been out of prison. They wanted me to cooperate. I refused to cooperate, as well as my 2 partners. Other people cooperated. Other people wore wire, like people that were friends since 5th grade. Like it was bad. I get it. You got the weight of the federal government bearing down on you. It's a lot of pressure. I understand that. They're threatening to give you 10 to life. Like that's what they were saying. And I understand why people would cooperate. It's just for me personally, I couldn't do it. And in order to get you to cooperate, like we start out with trying to give us 5 years, so we're not going to cooperate. We're like, all right, well, we're going to up it to 10 to life. And then so I'm not going to cooperate still. And they said, okay, we're going to give you a money laundering charge, which to me, I was like, I never used the bank. This was cash transactions. Like I didn't use credit cards. And my lawyers explained to me, when you sell a product, in this case, a drug, and you make a profit on that drug, and then you reinvest that profit back into that illegal product, that is technically money laundering. So that is, I got that charge because I refused to cooperate. And if you refuse to cooperate, they just keep adding charges as a way to add pressure. And this is kind of separate, but like, I'm a coffee roaster now. And I just found out 2 days ago, like for whatever reason, anyone who was paying with American Express on my coffee subscription, it stopped working. And American Express like found out about my record, and they have the right to refuse to work with me as a former or as a felon. So they no longer like on my website will not allow anyone to use American Express because they don't agree with my past.
Wow. So yeah, what went on after that?
So, I went into prison, not a fun experience. So I will say I was fortunate. I got to fight my case on the outside, like before I went in. And fighting a case like this, a federal case, particularly, it's a long process. It took 2.5 years, not necessarily on our end, but like they drag it out. But it took 2.5 years of fighting the case before I was actually convicted. And that was a blessing and a curse because I spent about 3 years in prison. And if I had just went in right away, like my time would have been almost done. But I don't know if my relationship would have remained intact. Like that 2.5 years of preparing for prison, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, we had a lot of time to figure out how do we maintain this relationship moving forward. Like, one, do we even want to, knowing I could potentially be away for 10 years because I didn't know how long I was going to be sentenced to until 2.5 years after fighting the case. And if we do want to maintain this relationship, like how do you do that when one person's incarcerated? I also did the same thing with my children. Like I just did all this work leading up to my incarceration to build up the relationships even stronger. And I had good relationships with my kids and my wife at the time, throughout all this. Like, you know, I mean, we didn't get into it, but when I was doing this drug hustle, whenever I had free time, I had a lot, like half the month would be working, selling drugs. And then the other half, I would just like take off to go spend time in the woods and sit in a swamp by myself and learn about nature and birds and do that with my kids. Like I was very active with my family, but obviously going to prison, your relationships are going to be put in jeopardy no matter how good they were before. And so I had a lot of time to work on those things with people. And I think that's why I made it through, I don't know how the language for this, as successfully as you might be able to. I mean, like, is there any such thing as successfully going through prison? I guess so. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. But I made it through with all my relationships intact and honestly probably came out stronger. That's not the norm. I mean, I call prison the relationship crusher. Everywhere in there, like around me, like marriages, friendships, romances falling apart left and right. And that was a scary thing for me to witness.
When you were in prison, was there any like option to use substances? I know they make their way in there somehow. And then obviously, like, I'm sure that you were going through a lot mentally. Did that kind of stuff ever come up while you were incarcerated?
For sure. So I remember walking in there. I was in the lowest security of prison because there was no violence associated with my crime. So I was not in a higher security level. And I remember walking in there and it was kind of wild to me because I was very familiar with the marijuana world, but in there, it was easier for me to find whatever drug like I wanted, and I didn't want any, but like they were available, and like I wouldn't know where to go to find heroin on the street at this point in my life. But in there, it was like there. Like drugs were much more available in there for sure. You know, you could just tell somebody and you can get it. I mean, that kind of changed because I went in 2019, and then once COVID hit, the situation got a little different and it was harder to get contraband. But yeah, it was pretty wild to see them so prevalent. I saw more drugs in there than I did, excluding marijuana, than I did on my free life.
But you never had any sort of impulse to go back to that?
I was called what you would call straight-laced in prison. Somebody who kind of follows the rules. I mean, I had complications with staff in there, but I wasn't like directly confrontational. I was doing my best to make sure I didn't lose good time. I wanted to do my bid and get home to my family as soon as possible. So yeah, I was what they call straight-laced, you know, no contraband, or contraband I had might have been like, I got access to like a muffin that I wasn't supposed to have, or I would like smuggle flowers from outside in the yard into the prison and like dry them in a book and mail them out to people I loved. Like that was, you know, I wasn't like involved in a drug culture or gambling or anything like that. I just wanted to do my time and get out as soon as I can. I mean, I saw people, horrible situations. Like, you know, there was a guy in there, I didn't know him, but I feel really bad. His daughter died in a car accident while I was in there. And he wanted to get permission to go to the funeral. Now, this is all nonviolent offenders where I'm at. None of us committed any violence. We're at the lowest level security that exists in federal prison. And they denied him the opportunity just to go on a furlough for a day to be at his daughter's funeral. And he was like, I don't know, you know, but he was like your average, like maybe like a real estate agent. He was like a professional, you know, he wasn't like a street guy. He wasn't into drugs. And then once this happened, he started smoking what, I don't know if this is a term that's used on a street, but maybe it's just a prison term. He started smoking deuce. The reason that was probably the most popular drug in there, which is, from my understanding, it's like synthetic K2, is that it can't be detected on the drug test. So it's very popular in there because you can take it and not get caught. I mean, but he ended up like just getting on that after his daughter died, you know, and getting fucked up. And the only way you can get caught is if you have it in your possession. And he must have had it in his possession, you know, and I saw him like fucked up all around the prison. And one day he's just getting taken to the hole. And it's just like, you see something like that. It was, I don't know. Prison is, it's heartbreaking. Like I think perhaps if the man was able to go to this service for his daughter being buried, he wouldn't have spiraled into that place,
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your story because it sounded like after you started to have kids that just the idea of being able to take care of your kids was what prevented you from using substances as a young teen. And then it propelled you into this life of the increasing weed selling. And then it also prevented you from spiraling out when you were in prison too. So is that how you see it? And is that sort of just like what keeps you on the straight and narrow?
100%. I mean, my family was my motivation. And when I first got arrested, I was like completely depressed. They were telling me they were threatening me with 10 to life. I thought my life was over. So I spent like a month or two like depressed and not doing anything. I mean, my wife would get up and go to work in the morning, and I would get up with her. I had an ankle monitor on while I'm fighting my case, like I couldn't leave the house. And I would get up and pretend like I'm getting ready to like go through my day. And as soon as she left the house, I would just go lie back in bed, like completely depressed. And I would just lay there until I would hear her car come home hours later. And then I would jump out of bed and like finally like put on some clothes and act like I had been up all day, like going through the day. And like I was like lying to her like that I was so depressed and miserable and I guess afraid of what was to come. And it got to a point after a month or two, I realized I'm going to have to suffer with what is happening to me. And so are the people around me, my kids, my wife, but they're all going to suffer more if I don't change my behavior. And that was like, I didn't want anyone to suffer needlessly. We couldn't avoid suffering, but I could definitely make it worse for everybody. And I decided like, okay, this is where I need to kind of step up and kind of, not necessarily in an unhealthy way, but like put that shit aside and show up for my family and my wife.
I'm curious what it was like for you after you got out of prison. Were you still able to run the record label? And I know you said you got into the coffee roasting business. And I also know that you are like a big ally for people that have addictions and that a lot of people talk to you about their process with that. So I know that's a lot of questions at once, but I guess get us caught up on what happened and how you've grown since you've gotten out of prison.
Yeah, so I'll try to remember all those. I'll do them in order, like a chronological order. So my first day of prison, it's the worst day of my life. I walk in there, it's horrible. And on the worst day of my life, someone gives me an empty cup, and then another person gives me a bag of instant coffee. And I made that cup of coffee on the worst day of my life, and I felt like a moment's peace while I was drinking that coffee. It's just, I feel like a regular guy for a moment. And it wasn't like I thought, I'm going to be a coffee roaster at that point, but coffee became like a ritual in there. Every morning I would make my coffee, and it would be my moment of escape. I would have 10 minutes where I would just make and drink my coffee and kind of forget I was in prison. So as time went on, like many men and women in prison, you begin to think about what you're going to do as your release date gets closer. And I thought I was done with the music world. I was going to quit the music world because I was like, I need to do something completely different. Like, I'm not going to get out and go back to the hustle again. The music world, like, I need to move away from that. So I thought, well, coffee is something that interests me. So I started having friends and family send me in all the information about coffee, books, magazines, just reading up on coffee. Meanwhile, the music world that I was a part of, they had found out I was in prison because I didn't like publicly announce this. And when they found out, benefits were put out for me, like benefit records. They raised over $50,000 to help me pay my legal fees and like buy vitamins and peanut butter like in prison. And I, at that point, thought I was done with the music world, but then I saw how much that community supported me. And I was like, it was like a conflict for me because I was like, I feel like I had to move on from it and grow into a new person. But I'm like, I'm going back to something, but I couldn't like abandon that support. So I decided that, okay, I'm going to take the things I'm passionate about, One, music. Two, coffee, which happened in prison. And then three, this idea of like bringing people together. And I thought, how can I combine all that? I decided to become a coffee roaster. I wrote 20 coffee roasters around the country from prison. 10 of them got back to me, told me what they could through letter. I learned as much as I could. And I got out and I started a coffee company. It's called Stay Free Coffee. Obviously, it's like stay free from prison, but it's also stay free and like stay free from addiction, stay free from, or stay free in a spiritual sense. So it has multiple meanings. And the record label I started is called Back on the Grind Records, which is also like, it's a reference to coffee, but it's also like, I'm out of prison, I'm back on the grind, I'm doing my hustle, but it's like music and coffee. So those are how those things kind of came about. And as far as like being an ally to, it's funny, I never would have called myself that, but it's true. Being an ally to people who are in or have moved through addiction. So I mentioned Pat the Bunny. He's a folk punk musician who I started working with when he was young, maybe 15. And his first band was called Johnny Hobo and the Freight Trains. Very nihilistic and like pro-drug with the lyrics. He was just like a depressed, pissed off teenager getting fucked up and singing about that. But it was very honest and passionate, and it like caught on. Like people appreciated the honesty of it. And then obviously there's people who appreciated the drug side of it, which was something I was never a part of. I never like encouraged that with my friend Pat. When he worked with me and did shows with me, like there were no substances involved. He went on to his second band, which was called Wingnut Dishwashers Union. His addiction had become more intense and more to harder drugs. He ended up stealing from me, like money from me. This is like known. He's sung about these things in his songs. And he ends up going to a program to get sober for a year. And then he gets out and starts another band as a sober person, and it's called Ramshackle Glory. And that project takes off even bigger. And he also starts to put out solo material as Pat the Bunny. But a big theme of all his music is his journey from addiction to sobriety. And so many people have, and he's very uncomfortable with this, as I would be too, have credited him for their sobriety. And like he says, listen, I in no way do I have the power. Like that power comes from you. Like I didn't make you sober. You made yourself sober. But his position in that world is monumental within like the underground folk punk and punk world in general. And my connection to him and my support of helping him get sober. Like he mentions me in multiple songs and stuff under my name Scott or as Pepe. And then I had other rappers that I worked with who were struggling with addiction, who have lived with me, where, things get difficult and they're like actively using heroin in my house with my wife and I. And like, I have to kick them out. I didn't just kick them to the curb, but it's like, we're going to find resources. Can you tell me what's the best thing for you? And this particular rapper, he's very open about his story. He shared it on my podcast. His name is Paulie Think. He's like, listen, in Texas, there's a program. If you're a musician, you can get into like a rehab program for free if you could prove you have like 2 releases on a record label. I was like, all right, I got you. I'll fly you out there. I'll pay for it. I'll prove that you are on the label. So, I mean, I've definitely just had a role in that world of music, which is often has addiction in it. And the thing that people seem to say the most about me is that I'm not judgmental of them as a person when they're going through their addiction, but I also like won't put up with their bullshit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I feel like there's a fine line to ride with folks that are really suffering in their addiction. And part of it is being a good friend and talking to them and understanding them. And another part of it is like allowing those natural consequences from the universe to happen. And if you can find like a respectful balance with people in between those two things and also protect yourself while you're doing it, I think that makes like not just a wonderful friend, but like a good ally to people that are suffering. So it sounds like you're doing a great job showing people empathy and support, and people are noticing that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that from the beginning. I mean, it was also like I had to learn that. At first I was like afraid to speak up or like, so it was a learning process for me, and it still is. And even now with like my coffee company, like it blows my mind because I've not struggled with addiction to substances, but like I get messages from people telling me like my coffee is like a part of their sobriety ritual. And like, I mean, I don't know, sometimes it brings me to tears. Like I'm so grateful that I can offer some inspiration to people finding a path towards a healthier life. But it's also like a wild position for me to be in because I never struggled with it.
Yeah, but you don't have to struggle with it to have empathy or compassion or just like be a good human to other humans. And it is true that it is the person's responsibility to like have autonomy and decide to work on their own addiction within themselves. But it's also simultaneously true that we all are here living in a society together and community to some extent or another. And we are connected in these ways. So honestly, like kudos to you for helping people in whatever way you can,
Really, I got a question for you, actually. I'm just curious if that's okay.
Yeah.
So someone had said this once years ago. I don't know who. No one I knew. I might have heard it on TV or read it in a book. And it kind of always stuck with me. And I'm curious your thoughts on this because I've thought about it quite a bit. But I'm paraphrasing. But they basically said the only reason they said there's two reasons people use drugs. One is to decrease pain and the other is to increase happiness.
Are you just seeing if I agree with that?
What were your thoughts on it? Like, I'm curious because, yeah, I've gone all over the place with my thoughts on that. Like, what do you think of that?
I mean, maybe as a punk or maybe as a person who just like thinks constantly about this type of thing, I shy away from anything that's like too reductive in nature. And the argumentative part of myself is already like, well, yeah, you can chase pleasure and you can shy away from pain, but what about simple curiosity? That doesn't really fall underneath the umbrella of pain or pleasure. I mean, I don't know. I just think that everything is like way more complex than people give it credit for. And as soon as we start to narrowly define things, we're just denying parts of ourselves and parts of our stories. So I don't think it's like a false statement. I do think like largely a lot of substance use is probably to avoid pain or to seek pleasure or some combination of the two. But I think that it's probably a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then I also thought like there could be a spiritual aspect to it, but that can fall under also like you're seeking happiness through spirituality or you're seeking to avoid pain through spirituality. But yeah, it just kind of struck me when I heard it years ago and I wasn't sure what to make of it. So I appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah. And I mean, earlier when you're like, I don't know, was my like escalating weed selling thing, was that an addiction? I don't know. And then, yeah, for me, it's just like humans need to define things. I feel like that's such a human need that we're constantly categorizing and defining and putting things in boxes and that's really natural and normal, but perhaps it is not always true or helpful.
Yeah. Well, we like to know with certainty how things are. And it's like almost impossible to know anything with certainty.
Right. Was there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to touch on?
Oh, there's a ton, but I mean, that would be another episode. I mean, with you, like, there's so much. I appreciate your show and the things you talk about. I mean, I would love to touch on like how I talked about while I was fighting my case and these steps that I took to prepare for like the best outcome with relationships and family and things like that. Like just doing the work, like that is something that I could talk about at any point. And I guess I would also love to talk about, I'm not asking to talk about these now, but I would like to hear more about spirituality from you. I'm curious about that. So, but for today, I think that's it. I mean, I want to thank you. I honestly, like, I'm not just saying this. I don't listen to many podcasts, but I've been listening to yours since I became aware of it.
Thank you. That's super flattering. Yeah. And it's been really cool to connect with you because it's just an easy conversation, and I do think that we could talk for a really freaking long time. I usually end with the same two questions. And one is, what do you think people don't understand about addiction?
Well, I guess for me and things where it's been in my mind lately is a lot of people don't understand that addiction can show up in forms outside of substances.
And if you could speak to someone in the darkest days of their addiction, what would you say to them?
What I would say with that to them is, like, if I was directly talking to someone in the darkest days of their addiction, if you are seeking something different, I am here for you. That's what I would say. Like, if someone was in front of me, I would, if they want to seek that path towards something beyond the addiction, I am here for you. That's what I would say.
I think that's a really important thing to note, because a lot of times people in their darkest days feel completely alone and they feel like no one is there to help them. So it's really important to realize that as soon as you're able to stick out your hand and ask for help, that there's going to be people that are standing there ready, resourced, and ready just to help you get where you need to go. So that's a very important thing. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been so nice talking to you today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Recovery Demystified. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend or rate and review us so we can reach a larger audience. Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Pettit made our logo. Our beautiful theme music is by Logan Bragg, and our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. We are entirely supported by your generous donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can find a link to donate in the description. May you be happy and free, dear listener.